Welcome to Classical Chats. I'm Tiffany. Today I'm excited. Well, every day that I do Classical Chats I'm excited, but I mean, today I'm excited because we have a guest that some of you actually requested. His name is David Bruce. He's a composer in the UK. He also has an impressive YouTube channel, and we did a recent collaboration that surprised some people, where he was analyzing Chopin's Berceuse, and it was based on my video, and then I had a little cameo, and I got to meet his little bird named Dorian, which was incredibly adorable. So we're going to talk about him, his composing journey, and also some of his favorite, more contemporary classical music. Hope you enjoyed this chat. It's really impressive what you have done, and I'm not surprised by just the setup you have here behind you. I see multiple instruments, and I wish
Yes.
my room was like this.
Yeah, I've got one of everything pretty much.
Yeah, so it's great to have you on because also some of your audience was requesting you to be on Classical Chats.
Cool.
So it was like the perfect timing because everything happened at the same time. So let's start from the very beginning, just because I ask every single guest this question, which is, how did your journey with music or classical music begin?
Well, as a kid, I was into music. I actually started fairly straight away making my own music and thinking about sort of bands. I played piano, but
Was
I
your
was
family
sorry.
musical? Was your family musicians?
Funnily enough, not at all. No, I always felt like I kind of stole it from everyone else in the house because my sister played for a little while, and then as soon as I quickly kind of overtook her, and then she kind of gave up for a while. I later sort of discovered my grandparents had various musical talents. I never met him, but my grandfather on my mum's side was a self-taught musician, and he played, I think, sort of church hymns and stuff on the piano. And my uncle, his son, is also very musical. So I kind of feel like I
Makes
maybe
sense.
it skipped a generation, perhaps, on both
Yeah.
sides.
But so then you just was playing around with making your own music. How did that become a profession? Because a lot of people play around with musical
Right.
instruments at a young age, right? And don't necessarily decide to become um, professional in it.
Yeah, I think it was probably it was actually kind of something I always was set on. I always feel very lucky to have known from a pretty early age what I wanted to do. I have two kids myself now, and you see that it can be a challenge if and many people go through life not really having a goal or a passion to aim at, and it's kind
Yeah.
of much easier when you do. It's so I felt very lucky to have had that. um I think probably initially, I'm not sure if it was just making albums or something, but I very quickly got into actual composing, writing notes down. I really enjoyed that the relationship that you had then, where you could spend some sort of quiet time thinking about what you were going to do and trying to sort of lay it out and organizing it, and then this slightly terrifying but also thrilling moment when you present it to the players and you try and get. I just love the whole kind of mechanism of all of that.
Mm. Interested in knowing a little bit more about that because people always ask me, "Do you compose? You should write your own songs. You
Yeah,
should be able to do it because you play the piano." But no, because I don't have that creative brain cells that
I don't believe you. I think everyone does.
yeah, but
You
I
just
just
have to practice.
know kind of it's like a gut feeling when you know you can do something and then when you realize you have some limitations. Like I actually the other day I found a video of myself when I was 4 or 5 and I was trying to play the ABC song, but then I had this weird harmony with my left hand, and that when I watched that video, I realized that I had that issue from the age of 4 of not knowing how to harmonize. And even though now I have a bit more knowledge of harmonies, I still have that problem. Or I could be the next bitonal composer, maybe. But that was what I was doing. I had like an E minor chord with a C, and I kept trying to like play it
Yeah,
together.
you heard
I said,
something.
yeah, but I said something doesn't sound right.
You
And
know,
then
it's so much about a kind of confidence. I think it takes a
that's true.
certain kind of self-belief to stand up there and say, I want you all to play the things that I've written down,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think I'm absolutely 100% sure you could do it if you just decided, I'm going to believe in myself and I'm going to write it, and also not worrying about what anyone else thinks about it. That's quite an important side of it as well. If you can find a way to do, I'm able to do that in music. I'm not so good at doing that in person to person. I'm very kind of aware of what someone else thinks of me personally in a way that annoys me. I'm really jealous of those people who are just, I don't care what anyone thinks,
Yeah, no, well, then I am very honored that you are here to open up a little bit and talk to us. So you keep saying that, believe in yourself and you know that you can do it. That to me sounds like I mean, it could be that you just decided when you were born that I'm going to be a composer and I have this strong self-esteem in my ability to compose music. But if not, then do you remember at what point you kind of came to that confidence that you speak about? I mean, I assume that you also went to, pardon my ignorance about your entire life journey and biography, but I assume that you've taken the um, what's the
Yeah,
word?
I studied at
The
university,
like
that kind of thing.
university classes and the music program. So you went through the traditional path also of
Yeah,
getting a music education.
yeah,
So at what point did that become, I'm gonna do this?
yeah. I mean, I have to say that it's a sort of it's complicated because I say there was definitely an inner confidence, but at the same time there was I definitely didn't feel that I had reached any stage where I was expressing myself at the level I thought I needed to express until I was probably in my mid-30s when I finally felt like I'd cracked something, and I was actually writing pieces that I thought, okay, that's okay, for so all through it was quite painful all through my study period to know, it could just, I think, being very self judgmental in a good way, just not just thinking, oh, I'm wonderful, because that's not what the self confidence is about. I suppose
Yeah.
it takes more confidence to know I'm not there yet, I'm not good enough yet, and to keep, I'm sure you're very similar in the way you've got these very high standards of what you expect from yourself, right?
Yeah, I've been called I'm very obsessive in details and
Exactly.
little things like that. But actually, I like the way you phrase it. That it takes a certain confidence to really know that you're not up to the standards that you have, and maybe that's a much more positive look at that struggle that you mentioned, the kind of painful period where you're not sure. Which, as someone younger, I am definitely in that flux and period of my life. But I like the way you phrase it, and it's hopefully it helps someone out there who it's very easy to think, oh,
Yeah,
they have all the talents, they have all the skills
and they
and the
always did,
background
and
to do it,
yeah.
and it's very discouraging that way. But I like that you
I
mentioned it.
mean, I have to say, being a young composer and trying to get your first pieces performed and listening to them is such a painful experience to sit in that room and hear it not sounding right, and you've got all these faces staring at you thinking that you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know what you're doing. So
Yeah.
you have to survive quite a lot of blows.
But you've clearly more than survived. I mean, you're doing very well, and you've also built a very impressive community on YouTube. So many questions, but I guess let's just follow chronologically. So around your 30s, you had a breakthrough or had more of your breakthrough moments. Do you remember which pieces they were?
Yeah, it was a piece that I'd been asked by Carnegie Hall to write for a sort of series of workshops with singers and an ensemble,
Mm.
and it was quite a daunting commission. So it was like, I'm from the UK, so of course I knew all about Carnegie Hall, and it was like, for an operatic soprano, it felt like a really daunting thing to write. And at some point, I just felt like, okay, I'm not going to try and write this masterpiece. I'm going to have some fun with some, and I found some children's poems from, my wife's Polish, and these were sort of these very cute poems from Poland, um,
Mm.
which I really liked, and I kind of thought I would do a sort of folk song kind of version of these poems. Um, and so I kind of just let my hair down and just enjoyed it, and I didn't try to be clever or write a masterpiece. It was just kind of fun, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just immediately obvious that it was like way better than anything I'd ever done in my life. So there's something
Mm-hmm.
about that kind of relaxing that just. And I spent a while after that thinking, well, all right, okay, so how do I keep that? How do I, you know, recapture that moment?
All right. I can already imagine how amazing that must have felt to really feel
Yeah,
like you've done something
I mean,
finally.
it was almost a cliched moment of dropping your guard and suddenly the real you coming out. And it did open up my career. I had a lot of performances in America actually after that. One thing or leading on to another, and that sort of led to where I am today, really.
Now I understand how, because I was a bit not surprised in like a you don't deserve it, but like surprised that like a UK composer had a commission in the Lincoln Center, because you had mentioned that
Yeah,
you worked with Arno Sussman, and
yeah.
who I'm actually going to talk to in a little bit today.
Oh, great. Say
So
hello.
yeah, small circle.
Yeah.
Now it makes sense. So you had that big moment in Carnegie Hall, and now it makes sense. So maybe this is a little bit offensive for me to to say, but I don't think YouTube existed around that time.
No, I can't remember exactly when it was. Yeah, but not.
I just mean like I don't want to say that you're
I
old,
am
or
old.
but
Yeah,
like you're not. I mean, come on, you're very
I'm young at
interesting to
heart.
watch. Dorian little. I mean, you have some um not childlike elements in your presentation that I really enjoy also. So I wouldn't call you old, but I just think, realistically
Hey,
speaking, and from a historical point of view, YouTube didn't exist around your breakthrough decade
yeah,
time period. So how did that happen?
yeah. Well, I think is it like maybe 4 years? I think I've been on YouTube now. Maybe three and a half. Um, I think it partly came out of just a desire. You see, even when you have a reasonable flow of commissions and things going on, it's still quite a kind of distanced world as a composer. Especially a lot of composers that perform or conduct, and I don't perform. I don't do any of those professionally anyway. Um,
Mm,
and so you can quite often have one commission every year or two a year, and so you sit at your desk, and then you have this one day where you suddenly go out into the limelight and take your bow, and then off you go back home again. And it can be it's quite a sort of I mean I wouldn't say lonely, because I obviously enjoy being by myself most of the time. That's one
mhm,
of the things requirements of being a composer. But I think I just felt like a bit more interaction. I
mm,
don't teach at university like that's another thing a lot of people do. So they're surrounded by interaction, and
mhm,
so I think I saw a couple of examples of other YouTubers in different fields who inspired me, and I thought, oh well, I could just. I mean, like a lot of people have had the thought, oh, what would my version of that be? I'm sure something probably similar for you. Have you got some vloggers that you were keen on that set you off?
not in music, actually.
Not in
No,
music, no.
I mean, I actually was just watching Casey Neistat's. I
Yeah,
don't know if
same here, same here.
yeah, I just was very interested in his way to communicate a story,
Mm.
and also, show really cool elements of his travels. So that's kind
Have you
of
got the
when
electric
vlog.
skateboard?
Ah, that is the missing thing. The booster board,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But I was just interested in the culture of vlogs, and how I think around 2016, 2017 they were becoming a very popular trend, and I was, yeah, I guess a little bit similar in trying to think of how to interact with the audience. But I think I came from a more philosophical standpoint of trying to humanize um, classical music, although that seems like very ambitious and
Mm.
too pompous. But just to kind of have that connection that you're saying that, you know, a composer, well, for you, you're obviously living and well in present day, but I just mean with the classical composers, you don't even have that bowing presence, you know, of their um, existence, and relationship to the music is a bit different and can be a bit isolating, and so that's why it's like old music
Mm.
and dead music, you know, for old people. So I wanted to bring back that human element by being the in between human
Yeah,
in the experience of classical music. So that's how it started. But that's not interesting. That's not the point of
yeah,
a classical chat. I don't like to talk about myself. But for you, you've done an amazing job, though, incorporating education and trying to explain pieces to a wider audience. So um, how did you have that format?
I mean, it's just evolved a little bit. I mean, I think I could. My idea. I mean, there's several ideas that were connected in the first place. Um, I was definitely aware that I have quite a, for want of a better word, a lowbrow attitude to music generally. I'm not sort of somebody who likes the idea of a sort of, the grand pedestal of classical music. I like just it's just music as far as I'm concerned, and I
Yeah.
like I convey that, I think, just naturally, just because that's who I am. There's also more sort of selfish interest. You see, I say I don't play anything professionally, but I just love messing around with stuff, and a lot of the
Is that why you have a million
yeah,
instruments in your
that's
back?
literally, one of the ways that I compose is that I will grab an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want to hear it, but it's very helpful to, get a sense of what
Mm-hmm.
it's actually like. Just the physical motion sometimes of what playing an instrument's like. Um, and Yeah, just I suppose just the creative urge generally. I think the composing fulfills the sort of deepest and most kind of most intense and most detailed aspect of it. But I've got a very kind of much wilder, freer creativity, which is just would do something very quickly in an afternoon, or in 5 minutes, or and some of that comes through in sort of the animations or whatever that I do, but also kind of the projects that we do. If I write a little piece for a video, it'll be some, it's not in the same vein as one of my real pieces. It's something that I've probably done in a day, in most cases, even a minute long piece or
Mm-hmm.
something. And it's really,
Oh,
really
interesting.
enjoyable for me just to let that creative side out, in which doesn't get
Ah.
much expression elsewhere. You only get this very formalized expression.
Mm-hmm. Ah, interesting. So there's a difference that you have between the music for the videos versus for
I mean,
your
it's sort of from the same
normal.
place. It's just much more polished in my
Mhm.
finished piece. I mean, I've been thinking recently. I was reading about a writer, and he was saying his process was that he would write his first draft, and he knew that it was always going to be terrible, and he actually quite enjoyed that, because it takes away the pressure. You don't have to write something great straight away. You write something rubbish straight away, and then you go round and you go over and over and over it, and then you just polish that bit, and you change that bit, and you just and eventually it turns into something shiny and nice. And so the things
Hmm.
that I probably do on YouTube are, have only been polished a couple of times, whereas you know a
Mm.
real piece will have been polished thousands of times.
Ah, so this is a perfect segue for me to ask from a composing for dummies uh, perspective. I try to ask this question so many times when I meet composers here and there, and I never quite get a systematic answer. I mean, not that I was expecting every single composer to do it the same way, but it's always like, sometimes it happens like this, sometimes it happens like that. Probably might be the same with you, but how does the process start when you compose a piece, when you sit down? Is it with an instrument that you're playing with, or is it a tune you hear in your
No,
sleep, or
I
how
think
does that begin?
an awful lot of the time it is the combination that I'm writing for. If I've got a commission, or if a piece that I want to write,
Mhm.
it's exactly what those instruments are, and I kind of try to physically imagine them, and sort of imagine it like a conversation, or a battle, or some other kind of thing like that. and there's always some way that the instruments will speak to each other, so you'll just get a sense that, well, that one feels like it's in charge. There's an actor's book called or Impro maybe, where they talk about the way it was about how to improvise with somebody on stage, and they talk about one of the key ways that you do it is to imagine your status in relation to the other person. So let's say you've got a manager and an employee, but the manager is a kind of low status person, and the employee is confident and high status. So you straight away know, then once you've established that, you know exactly how they would talk to each other, because the manager would be trying to be manager, but they'd be low status, so they'd be it would be difficult. And there's something a little bit like that with instruments, that you can find these roles that they might have. So that's kind of quite theatrical, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I liked your answer. It's I mean, it wasn't like there was a good or bad answer, but the way you explain it, it makes a lot more sense in terms of how an idea comes about. You really start from like a drama, essentially,
Yeah,
between the
that's definitely
instruments.
one way. I mean, there are other ways, like rhythm is probably one of the key aspects of my music, which in some pieces at least is the first idea. I've had some pieces which are just a rhythmic idea, which I then explore. So if I sort of find a rhythm that I'm interested in, then that can lead to a whole piece or a whole movement.
And then when you say you polish a piece over and over again, how do you know when you've finished polishing?
It's you just know it. It just you've been over.
Maybe it's a dumb question. It's like, how do you know when you're done practicing a piece for a
Yes,
performance? But
every detail.
are
When
there
you've
certain
thought through every single detail, and I mean literally every detail.
elements that you try to kind of look for, whether it's certain idea that you constantly measure up against when you try to polish something?
Um. Well.
I don't know if my
It does,
question
yeah, it
makes
does.
sense, but for
There's definitely
yeah,
times, like for a while, I was really focused on what they sometimes call roots music. So if you think of, like, in the folk traditions, like sort of Romanian gypsy bands and things like that, and I was often or klezmer, I was inspired by these kinds of music, and I would try to imagine. The piece I'd written was for some kind of imaginary folk world, and I would imagine them playing, in the village hall or whatever, or on the street corner, and try and sort of see if it had that life and vigor that of the thing that I loved. I suppose, yeah. I suppose the kind of model always comes from some other music. So, like, Janacek is another big, is one of my favorite composers, and there's something so kind of joyful and optimistic and full of life and color that I always feel in his music, and quite often I have the same aim in a piece of mine. So if only I could get to that level of wow, of life.
yeah. Well, I guess we can now transition into your choice of music, but I don't know a lot about Janacek, I have to admit and confess, but I remember one of the operas I
Hmm.
went to at the Met was a Janacek's opera. I forget which one, but I remember feeling incredibly overwhelmed from the power of expression somehow. It was not a
Mm-hmm.
happy opera. So actually, it's quite funny that you mentioned that his music is very uplifting somehow. I was just very disturbed, like
Mm.
shaken up, kind of from.
That sounds like it.
I forget which
The name, I've forgotten of it now, but it's the ones that's set in a Siberian labor camp or something like that. Would that be the one?
maybe it was a while ago. I was in college, but yeah, explain to me why Janacek.
Well, I mean, so it's a lot of different things in his. There's something about his form which is amazing in some of his chamber pieces and orchestral pieces, like the Sinfonietta. He has these just really clear forms, which just that they're unlike any other piece, really, and they. I've always admired the way they kind of usually lead up and stop somewhere, and you're kind of you're always left wanting more, but in a good way.
Mm.
But I suppose, yeah, two of my favorite operas of his are The Cunning Little Vixen, which you definitely must hear if you want to see something life-giving and optimistic, because it's all about the cycle of nature, and
Mm.
it's such a beautiful score. And the one that I mentioned in my choices was the Macropolis Case, which is probably my all-time favorite opera, which has this ridiculous plot of a 300-year-old woman whose father was an alchemist and had created an elixir of life, and the king had made him test the potion on his daughter. And of course, they never knew that it actually worked. So here she is, 300 years later, and she's lived through all these periods, and she has this problem now that everyone she's ever loved has died. So she's kind of become she's lost any meaning in her life, and she's become very kind of cold, and people fall in love with her because she's still radiant, but she kind of nothing means anything to her anymore. So it has a very powerful ending where she kind of, without spoiler alert, she decides, okay, I'm not going to take the elixir the second time, and I'm going to just allow myself to die. So it's actually a life affirming. It's about the beauty of an ordinary length life, and treasuring the fact that things are not permanent.
That's a very poignant.
It's deep stuff.
But you spoiled it. No, but I appreciate moments like this though, because it makes you stop to think about what the composer's philosophy on
Yeah, I mean,
life is. And that's always what intrigues me a lot. And I guess it's a bit weird if you don't know. I studied philosophy in college, and that's why I mentioned philosophy being an
yeah.
interest of mine.
So I mean,
But
it
it's like
very much.
yeah.
Recently, a few years ago, I wrote an opera called Nothing, which was originally done in Glyndebourne and is on a new productions in Copenhagen and Oslo this next year. And I think that story was in the back of my mind because it's a story about a boy. It's a young adult opera, and it's a class of kids, and one of the characters in the class gets up and says nothing means anything. It's all pointless, and the other kids then try to prove him wrong, and try to express and find ways to show that there is meaning in the world. And it's a famous story in Denmark, and I loved the way that it didn't actually give you the answers. It just kind of made you question. You have to.
That's my favorite thing. That's why I loved my years studying philosophy and reading like Socrates. It's all just questions after questions, dialectic of making you think in so many ways, and you find out so many different other points and perspectives on life without really having to come to just one definite answer. That's the beauty of philosophy, and that's why I appreciate works that are inspired by
It's very
that kind of
powerful, I think,
thinking.
as an experience for an audience member to not be told what to think, and to find, to create the part of the art, a part of the meaning in their own head, because then I think then you really you feel it much more if you feel like it's your thought.
Let's go on with your rest of the list you sent us. So Thomas, is it 80s Addy?
Addis, yeah, Thomas Addis, yeah. I thought I'd pick a piece by him, which is actually just an arrangement of a Couperin piece. He has some fantastic pieces in their own right, but I thought if your audience is less familiar with contemporary classical, then this would be a really interesting way in, because I just absolutely love these little arrangements. They feel like completely new pieces. The color that he brings out of quite a small ensemble is just so vivid and original, that yeah, it's just they're just gorgeous. That's simple reason. I think people. I can't imagine anyone would not like them hearing them. So.
So I'm glad you picked it. I heard one of his pieces in a live performance. It was a viola piece, and I was just so touched by the. I don't know how to explain it. It's just it's almost quite rare for me to be so immediately attached or fascinated by a modern piece of music that I've no like connection with, never heard of before. Like it takes that one little element extra that pulls me in, and he had that in his composition. So I'm glad you
Yeah, I
chose
mean,
one
there
of
are
it.
some composers that you have to sort of raise your hands and say, that's a level I'll never get to, and I'm happy to accept that with, he's very much up there amongst some of the greats, I think.
Well, never limit yourself is what I would say. I hate the judgmental levels.
Yeah, don't compare.
Yeah. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about your piece. You have a Constellation of Rain. Is that the name? Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Why did you choose this one?
Why did I choose that one? I mean, it's a relatively recent piece. It's a 20-minute sort of songs without words, you could say. Sort of, it's a series of um, 5 pieces, which all are inspired a bit by rain in various ways. I mean, there's a sort of deeper meaning to it, in that it's imagining that the way that when we die, we become part of the cycle of nature. So that if you've got a loved one who's passed away, their atoms might literally be in the rain, and so it's all quite delicate, and there's lots of the actual kind of imitation sounds of rain, but the way rain moves or the way it speeds up as the sort of storm arrives. So it's also one of my favorite performances by Camerata Pacifica, and some dear friends there. Nick Daniels, absolutely amazing oboe player who he's from the UK, but he is in the ensemble there. But everyone in the ensemble is just amazing. So it's quite rare that you get these performances where every note is in the right place and it just does exactly what you'd dreamed it might do. And this was one of those performances.
Oh, well, I definitely will take a listen to the entire piece, and it's lovely to hear the story behind a work like that. So thank you. And
Yeah.
also, I must say that when you were describing the metaphor of rain and kind of its reminder of, not necessarily a reminder, but a consolation of also the more poignant moments of life. That kind of deep level of thinking. I mean, I have not watched every single one of your YouTube videos. I'm sorry, but it doesn't really show through in the as much, I think, in the YouTube world. So I'm glad to have had this conversation with you.
It's sometimes again, that comes back to the whether you're the audience that you're aiming at. I think in some of the earlier pieces I did talk a bit more about the sort of gentler and more philosophical ideas, and I perhaps have felt or found myself veering slightly more towards topics that I know will be sort of more pizzazz, which, as I say, it's a danger and something that one tries to keep in mind, so
Yeah.
I'll try and do some more serious ones for you.
For me,
Some
well,
more
I
thoughtful
think.
ones.
But wait, I have to ask before we end this. When was Dorian born?
um, Dorian was
I think
born.
Dorian alone was like, I have to be part of this. I mean, so
I was
cute.
so happy that you spoke with.
Oh,
I
I
don't
mean,
know how.
it's great talking to you because I sense that you are also very imaginative and you think of kind of the roles of instruments and
Hmm.
kind of personification of instruments. And my audience knows that I call this a person essentially. So, yeah, I think I sensed a little similarity in our thinking. So,
Yeah, it
glad
was.
we
I think it
met
was
in Dorian.
literally only a video or two before that. So
Really?
yeah, it's
Ah, so recent.
we have
It's a
to
baby.
have to see what happens next.
But why was he born?
Just I'm not actually haven't decided whether it's a he or a she as well. It turns out that,
Oh,
that it
it?
well, not, you know, yeah, I'll let people decide that, shall we say?
So just one day you decided I'm gonna have a character.
Yeah, I think it started off by I wanted a more interesting way to make texts come in and out if I wanted to like quote
But you're
something.
so good at that.
So I thought,
The
oh, it'd be good to have a bird flapping along, and then I suddenly thought, oh, I need to talk to this bird at the end of the end of the video.
ah.
I like challenging myself to the. I mean, you know, I'm not like a camera person really. I'm not an actor or anything like that. So to try and even just sit there and go, you know, that was like major acting, you know, attempt by me. That cost me a lot to try and do that.
Well, it's definitely worth it. I think it definitely draws in an audience. It drew me in.
I think Dory needs their own Instagram channel. That's you know.
Yes, but you do all the animations yourself, no?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
impressive.
There's
That's
a few tricks I've learned recently. Like there's a lot of green screen stuff on YouTube that you can just, you know, it's just free to take, and then so some animations are literally the main difficult part has already been done, and you just sort of slot it in. So that's a little trick for you.
good to know. I mean, I when I saw your videos before the final cut, and I was like, I don't even know how to do any of this green screen stuff, but it's great. I hope I get to meet Dorian again.
Absolutely.
So cute. Anyway, I don't want to take up more of your time, but it's been lovely. Thank you.
It's been really nice. Thank you so much for having me.
It was nice to meet David and get to know him as a person and as a composer. We've actually never met before, even when we did the YouTube, it was just via email, and we see each other's videos on YouTube, so we know that we actually exist. So it was nice to get to know him. Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out his recommendation of music. His curated playlist will be linked in the appropriate places in whichever description of your platform that you're currently listening or watching this episode. And check out our other episodes of Classical Chats. Keep up to date to whatever fundraising we're currently doing at Together's Classical, so you can support us in our mission to bring classical music to everyone. Thank you very much.